Hey everybody, we are back. I've got Darin here in person today. It's awesome. Last night we went and saw Ancient Aliens live. It was a pretty cool, it's a pretty cool event. We got to see Nick Pope and Travis and William Henry and Giorgio and the
David Hatcher Childress.
yeah, the craziest man of all. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, David Hatcher Childress was there. Pretty cool event. Any highlights that you thought were amazing or cool?
It was just neat to see them all in person and just kind of have a discussion. And honestly, I thought of all of them, Giorgio's the rock star. So I think we discussed that we both wish that David Childress had said a bit more. He seemed to be the odd man out last night.
Yeah, I was a little concerned about Travis not being able to have enough input because he's the science guy, and I don't mean to like downplay and put science in air quotes, but it was a really cool thing. In fact, I bought his book, which I thought was really neat, and it's called "The Science Behind the Secret." And this is something I've been lecturing on in Masonic circles for a really long time. And I had no idea that he wrote this cool book about the topic. So now I've got some additional resource material. I'm excited to dive in. I also got David Childress's one of his books that they had called Obelisks, Towers of Power. And it was cool. It was like autographed. So pretty neat. The only David Hatcher Childress book I have that's autographed. I've got a couple of his books on the shelf back there. But today, what are we talking about?
We're going to talk about Admiral Richard Byrd and his Arctic expeditions, so both the North and South Poles.
So Richard Byrd, retired admiral. He is a former retired Navy, an interesting guy all around. He was a Mason.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard stories that he was, some of the first people to fly over the poles, and that he dropped flags of the United States, on both poles. But one of the things that I think is really fascinating and something that didn't come up last night was, at this Ancient Aliens thing, they did ask David Hatcher Childress a little bit about Antarctica. And he was, I don't know, I've never seen him like not talk a lot about something. And I don't mean that in a bad way. But he was very brief on his statements about Antarctica and some of the stuff that is supposedly going on there.
Yeah. I think in his defense, they asked him towards the end. It was kind of like an afterthought. So I don't think he had much time to talk about it. But
yeah, that's fair. So what are we talking about though? Like really this idea of Antarctica, the occult, why we would talk about it on this show is there's a number of things that are, going on there. There's supposedly this idea of like Nazi hollow earth. There is UFOs. There is U.S. top secret mission to Antarctica. There's pyramids and like you name it. Antarctica seems to have all of it.
flat earthers believe that's where the giant wall is that keeps the people from falling off the earth.
So there you got it. The giant wall is there. That's going to be the main the main reason to go there is to check out the wall at the end of the earth. So if we start kind of at the top, we looked at Operation High Jump, which there's a lot of information about it on. If you go to blackvault.com, John Greenwald has compiled a number of documents related to Operation High Jump, which was the official name for military expedition to the Antarctic which was in a program that went from 1946 to 1947. The task force that was sent down there it was called Task Force 68. It had 4,700 dudes went, and 13 ships went down there, and multiple aircraft.
Yeah, I want to say like the flagship of the U.S. Navy was assigned to it. I forget the carrier's name, but I think it was Coral Sea, but I'm not 100% sure.
So the United States has this like investment in protecting itself as a nation. And a lot of what we talk about with Operation High Jump is, supposedly Byrd goes down there and they look for like a way to colonize essentially Antarctica, or to use Antarctica as a military outpost to protect the homeland, which is the United States.
Essentially protect the United States strategic interests from what they felt potentially could be the militarization of the continent. By at that time, it would have been Russia, it would have been the new enemy. But
which was interesting, right? Because essentially, the most popular documentary on high jump in the realm of ufology and kind of paranormal area that we're all talking about is a Russian documentary. What's interesting is Richard Byrd in one of the so March 5th, 1947 edition of a Chilean newspaper is where we get some of the high strangeness. There is a quote attributed to Admiral Byrd as saying the United States needs to protect itself, from
invasion of hostile planes that are coming from the polar regions, and that this enemy potentially could be coming from either one or both poles. And then there's another part of it which I think has been kind of translated or completely made up, where they take the quote and attribute it as meaning that these planes could fly from pole to pole.
Yeah, like at super speed.
Yeah.
So what I've heard was, if we look at this at face value, when you talk to somebody on the street, oh, what about Richard Byrd and the war in Antarctica? Here's the story. Apparently, the US sends Byrd down to Antarctica with all these ships in order to scout out and see where the supposed Nazi UFO / technology base is in New Swabia, which is like where the Germans did an expedition down there when they were looking through, to find good areas for military enforcements, or maybe even looking for occult things like hollow earth and all of these other things. Byrd goes down there in an expedition that's supposed to last months and instead lasts weeks. Is it weeks? Maybe 3 months?
Yeah, I think it achieved its objectives in half the time, which has led to further speculation that there was this battle and essentially the fleet limped back to port after facing this technologically superior enemy.
And so this idea, right, that the entire US fleet encounters UFOs or something, goes to battle and loses, and we limp back to port in Chilean waters before getting back to the United States. Here we are today talking about a potential Nazi / alien UFO threat that apparently exists in Antarctica. And then you can think about how we've not gone back there. Like, oh, there's no expeditions in Antarctica today. We won't go back there because supposedly we were told to stay away or something.
But we have a base there.
So we have a base there. Yeah.
People go there all the time.
Yeah.
You can actually go there as a tourist, believe it or not.
So this is really interesting, right? So where does this all come from? The interesting things that as Darin and I were looking around and trying to figure out where this information comes from I've seen so many specials about, Admiral Byrd battling these UFOs that, supposedly Nazi Germany develops UFOs. Now we'll try to put some pictures here up on the video for those people who are watching. Some of the actual real designed UFOs that they tried to develop. And to my knowledge, Darin, unless you know different, did they ever get anything off the ground?
No, not to my knowledge, although there's speculation regarding the Nazi bell that potentially
Die Glocke.
Die Glocke, that Die Glocke actually flew. And interesting sidebar, if you look into the crash at Kecksburg, the shape of the supposed UFO that fell in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, looks an awful lot like the German Die Glocke.
It does. It does. That's for sure. I think, and that's what's interesting is like when we look at Kecksburg, that UFO crash, and the lore surrounding it, and you look at the shape, it immediately leads people to go to Glocker, and then they go to Nazi UFOs, and then they go to Antarctica, and then all of a sudden we did battle there, and Admiral Byrd, and now we've got a UFO presence here on Earth, and a UFO base in Antarctica. And this is really interesting because I think a lot of people who, like myself included, when I think about UFOs and Antarctica and snow, I immediately go back to the X-Files episodes where Mulder travels to Arctic regions, and he finds the UFO there that comes out of the ice.
Well, it's the plot of the first movie. Scully gets abducted yet again, and he has to go to rescue her in the Arctic, and ends up in this giant UFO, and ends up rescuing her. And then the UFO kind of comes out of the ice, and he sees it fly over them.
Yeah,
and of course Scully's head's buried in the snow.
Yeah, she doesn't,
not only proverbially, but
she doesn't get to see
literally.
it.
And
it's fascinating, and so we keep seeing these different themes pop up. And I want to believe, I think everybody wants to believe these really interesting stories that we can continue to talk about. And I think as Darin and I walked through this one, I don't know, we're a little bit skeptical at times, right? Skeptical. I think when we looked at, our last show that we did on Travis Walton, got a lot of attention because Darin and I basically came to the table and...
Did you get feedback on that?
I did get some feedback, yeah. I came to the table as I believe in the Travis Walton case. Darin came through as skeptical based on some really interesting articles that had been written from a very objective viewpoint, and in my opinion were very well done. So much, in fact, that I too now doubt very much that anything UFO related outside of a manufactured hoax actually happened. Perhaps with this case, the Nazis over Antarctica. I mean, if you Google search today, you'll find everything.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just like, yep, everybody knows about the Battle of Antarctica with Richard Byrd. I mean,
there's quite a bit of information out there about it.
They talk about it on Ancient Aliens. They've talked about it on, all these different UFO shows that you can get on Amazon Prime. There's just all kinds of stuff. And thinking about it now, I almost wonder how do they fill up an hour-long special when, I don't know, I think Darin and I spent 25 minutes hunting down leads to where these stories come from. Here's what I wanted to know. The often attributed quote, right, of right. Byrd. Byrd says, we're going to encounter an enemy that can fly from pole to pole in seconds. Right. And then there's the other thing that I don't know that Byrd actually says that he encounters UFOs and fights them. I never heard anything like that.
Uh-huh.
But there's this rumor. I'm like, where do these things come from?
Right.
And one of the interesting things was actually I think when we both said aha is when Darin, you alluded to the mistranslation.
Yeah.
The original says Admiral Byrd spoke of quote unquote flying objects that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. And the Spanish that comes across, we'll put it in the show notes for you because my Spanish is not great unless you want to take a crack at reading
Boy,
that.
mine's not that much better.
Okay. So we'll put the Spanish right inside the show notes there in the notes for under YouTube, right? And they said it's a very free translation of this particular Spanish phrase. And more correctly, instead of saying, could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds, what's it say there?
United States could be attacked by planes flying over one or both poles.
And so then what did I do? We took the Spanish there. We actually threw it in Google Translate, and it detects Spanish and it translates into exactly what he said. The United States could be attacked by planes that can fly over one or both poles. It is a terrible translation, apparently. Just like what happens with the King James versions of the Bible. We owe so much of the misinformation, I think, to just bad translations. But this doesn't take away from the UFO lore still, because there are these other stories that we have about like the UFOs, when we're fighting UFOs. You know a little bit about the planes that supposedly got shot down over New Swabia or something, and we weren't even close to the area.
Right. So the way that the legend goes, that these UFOs came out of the ocean apparently, and they were Nazi UFOs. And
so transmedium UFOs,
battling the fleet. And one of the problems with that is that Admiral Byrd's expedition was nowhere near the territory of New Schwabenland that the Nazis had claimed back in 37 or 38.
So we'll put up a map too, so you guys can see where this is. But if you could imagine like an island, right, and then the Nazis kind of had the top area, and then basically the rest of it is already claimed in Mary Byrd land. And
it's not just, I mean, Antarctica is huge. I mean, I think that Antarctica, you could fit the whole of the continental United States within Antarctica. It's a pretty big continent.
One of the things that came up last night, actually, that I thought was interesting, we just didn't really go much more into, and the more we dive into some of this stuff, I think we may actually find reasoning for it in the future that is, I don't know, acceptable to the skeptical mind. But like, what about the Perry Reese map? Right, this is really interesting.
Right, yeah. Perry Reese map essentially is an ancient map that shows the coast, the actual land coast of Antarctica, and the actual physical part that's not buried under ice. And only until probably the last 40 years with, as technology progressed, were they able to map the actual coast underneath the ice and found that it was pretty much a match to the Perry Reese map. So that lends credence to the thought that either Antarctica wasn't always covered in ice, and that's more of a recent, geologically speaking, thing, or that from the ancient alien point of view, that aliens had mapped this and then given it to humans. So
it is fascinating. I think last night in the car ride home from Milwaukee, we talked a little bit about Graham Hancock's, one of his latest books, which was called America Before. Definitely recommend it. I'll put a link in the show notes also to check that out. But there are bits and pieces. I mean, so immediately people always think about Graham Hancock as being a pseudoscientist or a sensational kind of journalist, and I think that's really sad. I think Graham Hancock has done exceptional work and presented his case pretty objectively for the most part. He never claims anything. He says, "Hey, this is what we found, and this is what the legend says," And isn't it interesting that these things are connected? I don't think he makes these huge logical jumps of reasoning or anything. He's a very respectable man who's got some awesome points of view on things. So yeah, check out the book. But one of the things that's interesting in it, he talks a little bit about the ideas of Antarctica being a actual continent that may have been, more in a habitable area of the planet. And he addresses the question, what does an ice age look like? And the answer is, it looks like Antarctica. This is an ice age that is happening. And he talks about the rumors of frozen or flash frozen fruit trees in Antarctic ice. But of course, something else that Admiral Byrd tends to find, right, is in the declassified documents on high jump, is they find areas of Antarctica that are mountainous and
Right. Not covered in ice.
not covered in ice. Yeah. And so there's areas that are not covered in ice and snow. Now, I'm not going to say super warm or anything, but I mean, obviously there's clearings and areas where they look a little quote unquote more normal.
Right.
And so that's really interesting because this presumably could be where we see some of the evidence for what could be, on Antarctica. And then so in the book America Before, Graham Hancock really talks about some of the theories about how that continent could have shifted and become a continent that is affected by a current ice age right now. And they talk about the flash frozen fruit trees and things as evidence to say that a global cataclysm could have happened and shifted the continent down. Now, of course, there's also the theories that Antarctica is Atlantis.
Garden of Eden's another one.
The Garden of Eden. That's a whole nother show in and of itself. I would love to do an episode on the Garden of Eden and like what it could mean as far as like, is it a planet? Is it a place?
Yeah.
Reality? That would be a pretty cool one. But what's the source? I think we looked around and we found some really interesting source material about the source of
The UFO battle.
The UFO battle, and this kind of thought that the Nazis have UFOs and high technology in Antarctica. Where did this even come from?
So it apparently came from a neo-Nazi group in Canada in the 70s. They came out with a book regarding UFOs, like UFOs, Nazi secret weapons, I think was the name of it. And they essentially published this report. And then other studies into Nazi occultism and UFOs kind of added to this claim that the Nazis had these flying saucers and that they had these super weapons. And I think the proof that RJ and I are here speaking American English and not speaking German is all the fact that you need that they did not have these weapons, because if the Nazis possessed this technology, they would have used it to great effect. So I don't think that they would have went tail between their legs had they had flying saucers that could, vaporize anything that we were to throw at them. So it's as much of a wonderful kind of science fiction story as it may be. And you what are those movies? Have you ever watched those movies?
The Nazis on the moon.
Yeah, I forget what they're called.
I wrote a short story about it, and then I attempted to claim legal, like, I don't know what you call it. Like, I wrote a short story and published it, and then all of a sudden that movie came out, and I was like, "What?
Copyright infringement?"
So the copyright infringement, but our stories were a little different. So.
But in any case, I find the idea that Nazis have UFOs and that they battled us, and in any case, if Nazis were in Antarctica and had such technology, I think they'd be hiding in Antarctica. We'd all be singing Deutschland, Deutschland über alles right now. So
yeah, and so one of this idea that, as you mentioned, this 1975 book, it was called UFOs, Nazi Secret Weapon. is published by a Canadian neo-Nazi publishing house, and you can actually find them. It was on, I clicked on the link for it, and it's actually an item that's no longer available. Why would it be available, right? Like, nobody's going to be republishing these kinds of books. And the other is the claim. It's called it says an esoteric post-war Nazism described in 2002 History of Occult Nazism, Black Sun, in which flying saucers were in fact German superweapons that had been developed and tested during the Third Reich. Well, we do know that they were testing UFO-like
they wanted
machines.
They had designs for a couple of flying saucers, but there's no proof that any of them ever flew whatsoever.
Yeah, the only one we have that maybe flew was the De Glocker.
Yeah.
So this is supposedly these things were shipped to the safety in Antarctica or in South America, or in we talk about they go to Brazil or wherever. Argentina is the big one. Chile. And they really claim it's the quote unquote last battalion of a massive Nazi military force of highly advanced UFOs and high technologies.
Right.
And to me, it feels a lot like you see those shirts or whatever. The South will rise again. And nothing against our Southern brothers out there, but it's this kind of mentality. It feels like at least in this neo-Nazi way to kind of give this made up Aryan lore
power,
like a last hope of some sort of overtaking of the Fourth Reich or something.
Right.
And so I mean, okay, Admiral Byrd actually didn't say anything. Now we know it comes from the newspaper, from the Chilean newspaper that we've gotten, that has been accurately translated now. So we know he didn't say anything flew from pole to pole very quickly. It's a bad translation. We now know that the entire UFO story stems from this 1975 book from a neo-Nazi publishing house as a way to bolster claims of bring hope to the Fourth Reich, kind of in a pseudoscience kind of way. And one of the interesting things I found on the California Digital Newspaper Collection from the San Pedro News Pilot, Volume 13, Number 23, April 1, 1940. There is a short little thing. It says, Byrd discovers new lands in Antarctica, bare earth, mountains, sighted on flights, reports Explorer. Punta Arenas, Chile, from the Associated Press. Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, commanding the United States government's Antarctic expedition, said upon arriving at this extreme southern Chilean port today that his expedition had discovered lands not charted on existing maps. Bare earth and mountains without snow, Byrd said, were sighted during 5 flights over Antarctic regions. Byrd said he had learned that some regions which the British explorer Sir Hubert Wilkins had discovered and believed to be islands actually are part of the Antarctic mainland. The Byrd expedition, which reached Antarctica in January to begin surveys and observations which may extend into several years, earlier had reported reaching and mapping the long-sought Pacific coast of Antarctica. Admiral Byrd, who is on his way back to the United States, said that the expedition flagship Bear, on which he reached here today, had gone through a storm off Cape Horn, which was the worst he had ever seen in his experience as a sailor. The Bear was expected to remain here for several days making repairs. Aboard the Argentine and Chilean naval officers, guests of the United States government on the expedition returning to Valparaiso, Chile. So this is like the only American article that really talked about Byrd and some
pre-World War II. I mean, World War II had started in Europe at this time because the Germans had invaded Poland in September of 1939, but we had not yet entered the war, and we wouldn't do so until December 7th, 1941. So This is essentially us, pre World War II footing, and obviously, I think probably high jump was maybe planned for maybe before they actually went, but World War II kind of intervened, and all the military resources were devoted at that time to the war effort.
And it just makes sense when we think about from a military standpoint. America has always been, the United States has always been concerned with how best to protect the homeland. And Byrd, up until his last days living, there's supposed to be a high jump too. There's supposed to be a subsequent expedition, yeah, and it gets canceled. And apparently, Byrd is furious, and he dies like 10 years later. But he's furious because he believes that without securing Antarctica, America is leaving itself open to a possible attack that could come from, they could fly over or use Antarctica as a base of operations to get closer to the United States, which is a legitimate concern. And today, who owns Antarctica? Does anybody own it?
No, nobody owns it, but there are several countries that have scientific posts there, if you will. But I believe we do, I think, have a base down there. It's a Little America. I forget what it's called, but let's kind of switch gears and talk about the supposed secret diary of Admiral Byrd, and how it talks about the entrance to Hollow Earth, because that kind of fits into all of this craziness.
All right, so Hollow Earth. There was a really interesting, I don't want to even call it a secret society. It was a pretty interesting society that later formed. So if you all go into your kitchen right now and you bought Oneida silverware, the beginnings of the Oneida group actually were a spiritualist movement that happened in New York. They believed in the hollow earth, and they believed that we were on the inside already, and that the sun and everything else is contained within the superseed in the middle. But what do we know about Byrd's journal on?
So as the story goes, Admiral Byrd's son apparently found these missing or hidden secret journal pages after Byrd's death, and he supposedly published them with some doctor as like a ghostwriter. But when you do some digging into it, essentially what you find is that this story of Admiral Byrd and his lost diary comes to fruition in the 1970s. And essentially what happens is that there's a organization based out of Rural, Missouri, called the Society for a Complete Earth. And the head of this organization I don't know if he's still alive, a Native American, Captain Tawani Wakanwa Sush, Shoush. And apparently he received a copy of this diary from a Dr. William Bernard, and then goes to publish this claim that Admiral Byrd claims during his 1926 his flight over the North Pole, that he had ended up having some plane problems. They end up landing in this secret valley, if you will, and come to find out Byrd is actually had flown into an entrance to the hollow earth, and he was then warned by the inhabitants of this particular place, if you will, not to use, that humanity was going to destroy itself with nuclear weapons, etc., etc., etc. The part of the problem with these diaries are that they keep changing the time frame. So I've seen them as published as part of his expedition 1926. I've seen it published in 47 as part of an expedition. When you really start to research it, it falls apart pretty quickly, because the time when it was supposedly written in 1947, He was in the Antarctic on high jump. The other time where he supposedly had written it in February of 26, and the North Pole would have been covered in darkness and he would not have been able to see anything. So it just essentially becomes a fanciful story of fan fiction. And in fact, and I forget where I saw it, but I want to say in researching for this episode, there was a website or maybe it was a YouTube video where essentially the dialogue in the book was almost attributed verbatim to a 50s science fiction movie. Like the things that this master in these diaries says to Byrd about the nuclear weapons, so on and so forth,
Really?
were quoted verbatim from this 50s sci-fi movie. And
Wow.
it may have been like The Day the Earth Stood Still or something more popular like that.
But does it say like Klaatu Verada Nikto?
Yeah, something. Who knows? But
well, so for anybody interested in this particular thing, there is a book called The Secret Lost Diary of Admiral Richard E. Byrd and a Phantom of the Poles.
It says it explores a strange land kept hidden from the public. Here, for the first time, is the secret diary of one of the greatest adventurers who has ever lived, plus proof that there's a vast, uncharted civilization exists inside the planet.
Well, I'm not sure about that. One of my favorite reviews here says the first 200 pages are just diary entries. Then you can rock through it in about 30 minutes. But my favorite part says the 100 pages after that are mixed with 25% historical quotes from various explorers and 75% of the author just kind of making things up to push forward the hollow earth theory. It's not a compelling argument at all, mostly just nonsense ramblings to try to make sense of the quotes presented, but there is no logic to most of it. For instance, an explorer writes that it's warmer than he expected in the general vicinity of the pole. And the author chimes in with something like, surely this is proof that the earth is hollow. But the idea of a hollow earth is so interesting to me. I mean, one of my favorite movies of all time, right, is
Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Yeah, Journey to the Center of the Earth is one of my favorite movies. I mean, I'll stop to watch that thing, the original, and you know what? I'll watch the Brendan Fraser one too. That's fine.
Yeah, it's good.
I think I love these books, and I think they're absolutely fascinating. I love the lore surrounding the idea of an internal, kind of secret, untapped, uncharted land, right? You remember Land of the Lost?
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, just all these really, really cool ideas. Something that's, I guess, factually important to talk about here is, the planet does have uncharted areas that are essentially prehistoric that are still living today. I mean, they just found like a sinkhole over in China that has trees that are, I don't know, bazillions of years old or whatever it is.
Ancient trees. Yeah, I think, I think, the idea of a hollow earth is possible. Not in the aspect of that there's a sun inside the earth and that there's this, this essentially this whole world, but there are, I believe, probably deep subterranean areas that we may have not discovered or that are still waiting to be discovered that potentially could harness some life or some ancient life. And one of the theories, speaking of cryptids, one of the theories with Nessie is that essentially that Nessie has an entrance to some, at the bottom of Loch Ness, that there's an entrance to some grotto or ancient grotto where Nessie kind of spends its time and then surfaces to eat or whatever. So
I don't know, man. I don't know.
Never know. But obviously, we're here talking about these fantastic ideas. I think, the idea of an earth is one of those. I think it's fascinating to think that, if you've ever been spelunking or ever been in a cave, it's just fascinating to see this subterranean kind of
definitely terrain.
So, and there are caves that are still yet to be fully explored. So it's an intriguing possibility that there may be these pockets, if you will, of where you have, maybe some enough sun shining in that you have this ancient plant life like they've discovered in China, and that's verifiable. But the whole idea that there's some race living inside the earth, who knows? I mean, the Hopi talk about the ant people, right? And they're from
right.
supposedly from the inside of the earth, and there have been other stories of people supposedly in exploring sewers and come across reptilian people. Or I mean, this is, you can go and just Google this stuff and you'll find these reports kind of sporadically throughout history. So is there some even the idea of these dwarves, the dwarves were these creatures that lived inside the earth or inside mountains and forged these weapons and that. So throughout mythology, you have this idea of this population of humanoid creatures dwelling within inside the earth. So I mean, is that just fantasy? I don't know. I tend to think that that ancient history teaches us that, for example, how would you and I think they used this example last night, like if you were to go back in time and give your smartphone with internet access to your great grandfather, he would think it was magic, right? There's that Arthur C. Clarke quotation about technology, when advanced enough, becomes indistinguishable from magic. So
Right.
the whole idea that these people may have encountered something that they did not have words for or explanation for, I think is plausible now. What's that mean? I don't know, but I think it's, given the advances in geology and tectonic science, it's very difficult to argue that the earth is hollow and that there's some there's some hidden earth within the earth.
I think it's fanciful and it's fun, and I think that, like you said, I mean, there's all these myths and compiled with the fact that we have seen possible hints toward, I mean, just small things like this sinkhole in China, or whatever the case is. But we do see that there are caves that have entire systems of living, new ecosystems we've never explored before. The bottoms of the ocean are home to creatures that can withstand pressures that on their bodies that we can't even contemplate. Jellyfish that live forever because they actually renew the cells that our own cells, just like a facsimile reprint of something, each copy gets worse and worse and worse, right? Well, it's like the human genetic code. Your cells replicate every 7 years or so, 5 to 7 years, whatever it is, 75 million cells or something, or billion cells, 7.5 billion cells replicating every year. Now, those cells actually, every time they replicate, that you lose a little bit of quality, and this is what causes aging. So, like, I mean, there's all these weird things that we find fascinating about. It's stranger than fiction,
right?
So who knows what we'll find in the future? I mean, I think there's a little bit of fact to all of our myths and legends. And it just kind of falls on us to figure those out as humans. But we got to get the geologists, we got to get the visionaries, the ancient alien folks. We got to get everybody at the same table and to treat each other with a little bit of respect, I think, which was a topic that came up last night a little bit too. Something else that came up last night was I think as we walked through this, right, we said, okay, yep, Richard Byrd didn't say the thing. There was no battle. It was just a made up story, from Nazi propaganda. And this has been kind of like pushed forward because I guess nobody wants to do 15 minutes of Google research, or maybe it's just more sensational to go for it. But then there's they talk about the pyramid in Antarctica.
Yeah.
And I guess to quote this pyramid, well, first of all, what do we know about the pyramid in Antarctica? Do we know anything about it? other than people say there's a big pyramid there?
Yeah, there's a giant pyramidal mountain that they've, discovered in Antarctica. But in the UFOlogy lore, there's actually this idea that there's this smooth black pyramid that has kind of recently been discovered, and Linda Moulton Howe has kind of championed this. She has documentary regarding this particular structure, and had two people that claim that they were members of SEAL teams that had gone to this particular structure in Antarctica and kind of talked about the mysterious hieroglyphs that were inside, and that this is why in the past, I guess it would be 10 years now, you see, you've seen Obama go down there. You saw Buzz Aldrin, I think, went down there for a while. Biden has gone down there. So supposedly all these dignitaries and that have all been down there to see this structure.
Yeah, we actually found a little synopsis here. It's called Antarctica: Alien Secrets Beneath the Ice. Put a link there for everybody. But the summary, so this is produced, written, and directed by Linda Moulton Howe. And, I love Linda. I think she's awesome. A number one, boss B, man. She's cool. However, I wonder, if, the sensationalism and all of these things and telling the story is important. But the summary of this particular documentary, and factual, it says, there's a huge secret hidden deep beneath Antarctic ice. Eyewitness Navy SEAL Spartan 1 walked through glowing halls carved with mysterious hieroglyphs. Marine Spartan 2 says these same glyphs are on the moon and Mars. Both whistleblowers tell reporter Linda Moulton Howe that ET humanoids have terraformed Earth and our solar system for millions of years. Yikes. I don't know. I think I'm going to watch this.
I've watched it. It's worth the watch. I mean, if you take it with a grain of salt. Do I think that there's something hidden in Antarctica? Absolutely. I think there's so much, that we have yet to discover in Antarctica. When we get into the idea of discovering alien bases, is it possible? Sure. If you're going to hide something, of course you'd want to hide it where it wasn't going to be seen. But if you have that much advanced technology where you're piloting craft that can do interstellar travel and seemingly have the ability to cloak themselves from us, that you're not going to just let part of this base end up melting away and be exposed to
right
humans
unless it's crashed and abandoned.
Possibly. I mean, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but given the part of the issue here with, and I have to trust Linda that she did the background checks on these guys and they are who they say they are. It's a fantastic tale, right? And there are parts of Antarctica that are supposedly no-fly zones that you're not supposed to fly over. And there's the idea that that part of this reason, and Linda's done quite a bit with Antarctica. One of the people that she has interviewed in the past was a member of a flight crew who they were medical flight crew, and essentially there was a medical emergency, and in order to get from point A to point B, they essentially flew in this no-fly zone, and one of the members of the flight claims they saw UFOs come up from this area of Antarctica, and that's why it's a no-fly zone, because essentially there's a UFO base there. And
oh wow.
So once again, do I think that if I'm a interstellar race, am I going to establish bases? Sure as heck, I'm going. If I'm, we do it now. If you think about nature photographers or people that study nature, they go out and they set up these remote, they go to these remote areas and set up observation posts and go to, observe the animals and study them. And if that's what's happening from a more technologically advanced race looking, into us and what makes us tick, absolutely, they're gonna hide themselves from us and put themselves in places that are hard for us to reach. So I don't think it's fantastical to think that they're especially now with all of the this idea that these objects are transmedium craft and that they function in the oceans, in the air, and in outer space at will. I don't think it's that much of a stretch to think that they have some sort of outposts or bases, in the deep sea floor, or maybe Antarctica or other places that are hard for us as humans to reach.
There's a documentary that came out, and I think you can find it on Amazon. It's a DVD, and it's just a recording of a talk that Skip Atwater did. So if that name sounds familiar, he was involved with Project Flame Grill, which later was Project Stargate, remote viewing kind of stuff. And it's a fantastic talk he does. But in it, he actually refers to somebody who says that they remote viewed the aliens that are here on Earth that study stuff. And when asked about how come the aliens don't interact with us, the answer was something like, "Well, I mean, you don't interact with birds and ants,
Right.
so it's the same kind of principle." And I was like, "Wow, it's kind of deep in a way." I mean, it goes back to something that I think a lot of scientists say, like, uh, if you've got an advanced civilization that is operating around you, you're not necessarily going to be interacting with the lower life form. I mean, do you think ants look up at people as gods? Or, I mean, like, think about in terms of size, right? Not actual consciousness of an insect, right? But like, there's this concept that there's a whole world around us that we don't see.
Right.
We'll get into the idea of interdimensional beings watching you, go to the bathroom, maybe in another episode. But I think one of the things that we can come away with, in terms of this, not the shiny black pyramid, but it was interesting that it did make the news. CBS News reported a new pyramid in Antarctica. And the geologist basically says, "This is just a mountain that looks like a pyramid." End quote by Eric Rignan. Case closed. We're all done there. Nothing to see here, folks. But maybe there's something more. I certainly feel like we will find something in Antarctica. I do put a lot of stock, I think, in some of the science that has been proposed in Graham Hancock's book. I mean, he's not doing the science, right? He's quoting scientists. And he's done, I think, a hell of a lot more research than a lot of folks.
Right.
I think we'll find something in Antarctica, and whether it's flash frozen fruit trees or it's evidence of human civilizations that lived there before it was frozen over. I mean, those would be fantastical enough for me.
Right.
That if we never find UFOs there, or if we never find anything else there, I'm okay with it. I think just the fascination of the fact. I mean, I want to know more about the human origin, and where we came from, and certainly any interactions we may have had with them.
So mote it be.
Any closing thoughts?
No, I just think that Antarctica is a fascinating place and lends itself, because it's so mysterious, lends itself to these ideas. And like I said, is it possible that there are UFO bases in Antarctica? Absolutely, I think that's a possibility. Nazi UFOs, probably not so much, given the reasons we've talked to prior, but I do think, as you said, I think that it kind of holds these mysteries that are yet to be solved, and it'll be interesting to see, if we can begin to solve some of them, because I do think that we will discover that it was probably once a very lush uh, paradise, if you will. I don't know if it was tropical or not, or but I think that there's a lot of probably hidden beneath the ice that we would be surprised by. And I would not be surprised if there were pyramids found in Antarctica, since there are pyramids found
on every other continent
throughout the world. So
yeah. All right, cool. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Beyond the Fourth Veil. You can find all of our other videos on YouTube or on the website, fourthveil.com. I think the next time we're going to tackle yet another awesome topic. We've got a list of great show topic ideas. Some other show topics that we thought about, MJ12, and talking about, is that real or legit? There's a cool film called Official Denial, I think is a cool movie, or the movie Abyss. I know Darin and I, you guys have heard us talk about X-Files a lot. I think we could do a really cool X-Files tribute show. The idea of ancient aliens or Roswell. Maybe we could do a Discord where we watch the movie Roswell and we watch it together, right? We talked a little bit about the Hollow Earth today. I think there's a lot more to unpack there with some of the societies that exist. Some different films like The Exorcist, a Ghost Hunters episode, best paranormal movies. You have a note in here for the missing UFO landing tapes. What's that?
That is the tapes that Gordon Cooper essentially, before he's an astronaut, filmed a landing of supposed landing of a UFO at I think it was Edwards Air Force Base, and they had film of it, and then of course the film was sent to up the chain of command and disappeared. But
fantastic.
What we were talking about there.
Yeah, so we've got NDEs, or near-death experiences, Serpo, I think, which is another really cool one that we should probably talk about.
Interesting.
The idea of Planet X or Nibiru, the 10th planet, alternate Eden theories. If you got something that you want us to cover, please let us know in the comments. I think we're very open to the show ideas, and the topics that we go through we're both pretty well versed in the occult, various theories on different paranormal and other things that lie beyond the fourth veil. So anyway, until next time, I'm Robert.
I'm Darin. See you later.